Welcome to the Twilight Zone of history. Here, far from the grand portraits of victors and the dry dates found in textbooks, we open a heavy oak door into a hall bathed in half-light. You may be accustomed to thinking that the world is founded on facts, granite, and steel. But I am here to show you that the foundation of our civilization is often mixed with a concoction of fantasy, half-truths, and outright lies. We will descend 30 steps into the depths of human nature, where genius and villainy are not only compatible, but inseparable, like two sides of a counterfeit coin. If you are ready to peek behind the curtain of official history, support this narrative with a like and share in the comments where you are listening from. It inspires the search for new mysteries. Get ready, we begin our immersion. Deception number 1. The prince of a country that never existed. We find ourselves in London in the early 19th century. The year is 1822. The air is thick with coal soot and the scent of easy money. The Napoleonic Wars are over, and Europe, tired of gunpowder, yearns for exoticism and wealth. We stand in a fashionable salon where the fate of thousands intertwines with the clinking of crystal glasses. In the spotlight is a tall, statuesque man with a striking posture, dark skin, and eyes that blaze with the fire of distant lands. This is Gregor MacGregor, a Scot by birth, a hero by legend, and arguably the most audacious architect of castles in the air in history. He is not merely asking for money, he is offering paradise. MacGregor calls himself a cacique, the prince of a faraway and beautiful country called Poyais, located on the coast of Central America. We watch as he unfurls a map before a captivated audience. Look at these details. Expansive navigable rivers, fertile plains where crops are harvested 3 times a year, cities adorned with white columns, and, most importantly, gold mines where nuggets lie just beneath the feet. This is the genius of MacGregor. He did not simply concoct a lie, he created an entire universe for it. We see guidebooks to Poyais being printed in the print shops of London and Edinburgh. They detail the fauna, climate, and the friendliness of the natives who supposedly adore the British. MacGregor went so far as to develop a constitution for this country, design the uniforms of its army, and even printed stacks of banknotes for the Poyais Bank. These notes rustle in the hands of bankers and simple shopkeepers, and that sound drowns out the voice of reason. The psychology of this scam is both simple and terrifying. MacGregor sold not land, he sold hope. In Britain at that time, economic stagnation reigned. Interest rates on government bonds had fallen to 3%. Then the cacique appeared, offering 6% per annum guaranteed by an entire nation. Greed mixed with the romance of colonial discovery. People sold their homes, farms, and spent their last savings to buy a ticket to a new life. We see them lining up to exchange their hard-earned pounds sterling for beautiful, yet utterly useless Poyais dollars. The climax arrives in the fall and winter of 1822 and 1823. 2 ships, the Honduras Packet and the Kenner's Lixall, set sail from the shores of Britain. On board, there are about 250 settlers, doctors, bankers, shoemakers, soldiers, and their families. They are sailing towards their dream. We follow them across the Atlantic, feeling their anxiety and anticipation. But when the ships drop anchor at the Mosquito Coast, reality hits them hard. No cities with columns, no harbor, no gold mines. All that awaits them are impenetrable jungles, malarial swamps, and clouds of insects. The capital of the region turns out to be a couple of dilapidated huts, once left behind by loggers. We see the horror in the eyes of these people as they realize their one-way tickets led to nowhere. Here begins a real tragedy. MacGregor didn't just steal their money, he stole their lives. The settlers tried to build some kind of shelter, but they were city dwellers armed with fake maps and worthless money. Soon, tropical diseases began to take their toll. Yellow fever and malaria swept through them one by one. We witnessed the agonizing torment of hope, when, after several months, a passing ship from British Honduras discovered survivors, only fewer than a third remained. Nearly 180 people paid with their lives for the beautiful tale spun by a Scottish adventurer. But the most striking aspect of this story is not the cruelty of nature, but the blindness of people. When news of the disaster reached London, many refused to believe in the deception. MacGregor, possessing devilish charisma, claimed that the settlers or the ship captains were to blame for allegedly landing them in the wrong place. Moreover, while the survivors were dying in the jungles, MacGregor had already moved to Paris and attempted to pull off the same scheme with the French government. Only the vigilance of officials, puzzled as to why a country with such wealth had no diplomatic relations, stopped a new wave of deaths. This deception teaches us that the bigger the lie, the easier it is to believe. MacGregor created an illusion so detailed that doubting it seemed insane. He raised £200,000 sterling, an astronomical sum for that time, equivalent to millions today. And most cynically, he never faced punishment. He died in his bed in Venezuela, receiving a pension as a general, leaving two of the world's greatest empires fooled. We close the file on the Mosquito Coast. The blood of the innocent has soaked into the lands of Central America, while fake banknotes have become collectors' rarities. But if this deception was built on greed and geographical ignorance, our next story is based on something else, a more subtle human emotion, reverence for ancient wisdom and exoticism. We will journey from the jungles to the intellectual salons of Europe to meet a man who not only invented a country, but created an entire language and culture from scratch, convincing the best minds of his time. The second deception, a man who invented himself and an entire nation. We leave the tropical heat and malarial swamps behind as we move to the very heart of intellectual Europe in the early 15th century. It is the year 1703, London, a city where reason is beginning to triumph over superstition, where coffee houses discuss the laws of Newton, and the Royal Society yearns to unveil the mysteries of distant lands. We enter one of those halls, where the silence is only interrupted by the scratching of quills and the rustling of wigs as the brightest minds of Britain gather. All eyes are fixed on a young man with pale skin and light hair. His name is George Salmanazar, or so he requests to be called. A spectacle unfolds before us, demonstrating that to deceive the cleverest people of the era, one doesn't need to hide in the shadows. One simply needs to stand in the center of the room and declare something so absurd that no one dares to doubt it. Salmanazar claims that he hails from Formosa, a mysterious island we today know as Taiwan. At that time, for a European, Formosa was as distant and incomprehensible as the far side of the moon. And this blond man with blue eyes became the sole window into this world. We watch his performance. How does he explain his European appearance? Oh, it's a clever move. He tells a tale that the upper class in Formosa lives underground, avoiding sunlight to maintain their aristocratic pallor. We see the scholars nodding, recording this nonsense as scientific fact. But Salmanazar does not stop at mere words. He lives his lie. Right here, before the eyes of a shocked yet intrigued audience, he eats raw meat, generously seasoned with spices, claiming it is the diet of his people. He sits sleeping on a chair, keeping a lamp lit all night, and prays to unknown gods in a language that sounds like intricate rapped music. The psychology of this deception rests upon two pillars, ignorance and hatred. Salmanazar brilliantly played on the religious sentiments of the English. He declared that the Formosans despised the Jesuits. In Protestant England, at odds with Catholic France, anyone who spoke ill of the Jesuits automatically became a friend and a reliable source. We see the Bishop of London taking this rogue under his wing, financing his education at Oxford, and inspiring him to write the main work of his life. The book is published in 1704 under the title A Historical and Geographical Description of the Island of Formosa. This is not merely a lie. It is a masterpiece of imagination, which is a century and a half ahead of the fantasy genre. We flip through the pages of this bestseller and marvel at the details. Salmanazar invented everything, from an alphabet with 20 letters to currency and clothing. He describes gigantic floating villages and temples where, according to him, 18,000 young boys are sacrificed to the gods each year. Just think, 18,000 hearts a year. Any demographer would say that with such a mortality rate, the island's population would vanish in a couple of years. But we see the audience, craving bloody details and exoticism, swallowing this number without batting an eye. Salmanazar was so convincing that he even invented his own grammar. He translated prayers and catechism into the Formosan language, and the linguists of that time, with a wise demeanor, analyzed the structure of the verbs he had invented. When the true Jesuit, Father Fontaine, who had actually been to Asia, attempted to expose the fraud by pointing out that the natives of China looked different, the crowd booed the priest. Salmanazar, with an unfazed expression, claimed that the Jesuit was simply lying to hide the truth about his exile from the island. The lie, supported by the crowd's prejudices, proved stronger than the witness's truth. However, like any house of cards, this palace of illusion was destined to collapse. But it did not happen due to external exposure. It fell apart because of the exhaustion of its architect and the ruthless logic of the exact sciences. We are present at the crucial moment of the downfall, during Salmanazar's conversation with the great astronomer Edmund Halley, the very one after whom the comet is named. Halley did not inquire about religion or customs. He asked how long the sun shines into the chimney of a house in the capital of Formosa during the solstice. Salmanazar, not being strong in geometry and astronomy, gave an answer that contradicted the laws of physics for that latitude. Halley merely smiled slyly. Gradually, by the year 1706, interest in the prince waned. Salmanazar, realizing that the game was over, committed an act uncharacteristic of most heroes of our almanac. He did not flee with stolen millions, he confessed. In his memoirs, published posthumously, he admitted everything, revealing that he was just a simple French vagrant who started by posing as an Irish pilgrim. But, realizing that Ireland was too well known, he decided to become Japanese, and then a native of Formosa. The remainder of his days, this great deceiver spent in London, working modestly as a writer and leading a pious life. Surprisingly, he was respected even after his exposure. The famous Dr. Samuel Johnson, creator of the English dictionary, enjoyed sitting with him in a tavern and said that George Salmanazar was the most devout man I know, and I would sooner agree to deceive a bishop than him. This story leaves us with the question, what is truth? If an entire nation is willing to believe in a fabrication simply because it entertains them and flatters their beliefs? Salmanazar showed us that culture, language, and history can be not the heritage of ancestors, but the product of one bored genius's imagination. We close the book on the fake Formosa. Words and languages are powerful weapons, but they require constant affirmation by voice. However, there is a lie that remains silent. A lie that looks at you from the wall and makes you weep with ecstasy, while it laughs in your face. If Salmanazar deceives scholars, our next hero aimed for the holy of holies of art, and his victim was one of the most terrifying monsters of the 20th century. We will leap forward 2 centuries to see how paint and canvas can become weapons of vengeance. Trick number 3. The artist who deceived the devil. We leave the grim salons of the 16th century to immerse ourselves in one of humanity's darkest eras. The calendar reads the mid-20th century. Europe is engulfed in the flames of the Second World War. But we are not on a battlefield. We find ourselves in Amsterdam, in a workshop steeped in the aromas of lavender oil, old varnish, and toxic chemicals. Here, in the dim light, a man with thin mustaches and a gaze full of bitter resentment leans over a canvas. This is Han van Meegeren. Official history will remember him as a counterfeiter, but we see his true essence. He is an unrecognized genius, thirsting for revenge. Critics have labeled his work as mediocre, outdated, and tasteless. They have trampled on his ego. And so, Van Meegeren decided that if they do not appreciate his own art, he will make them worship his brush, believing it to be the brush of the great Vermeer. We watch the birth of the perfect crime. This is not just a copy. Van Meegeren knows that to fool the experts, he cannot simply replicate an existing painting. He must create a new one that the world has dreamed of but has never seen. Art historians of that time speculated that Jan Vermeer had a religious period, but no painting survived. Van Meegeren, like an evil genie, decides to fulfill their wish. The anatomy of this deception is astonishing in its technical sophistication. We see him purchasing cheap paintings from the 15th century to obtain authentic canvases from that era. We follow him as he painstakingly grinds pigments by hand, using only the paints that were available 300 years ago. But the main problem is time. Oil paint dries over decades, becoming as hard as stone. Fresh paint will give him away in an instant. And here Van Meegeren makes a chemical breakthrough. He mixes pigments with Bakelite synthetic resin and bakes the finished paintings in an oven. The paint hardens instantly, covering itself with a network of noble cracks known as crazing. When the painting Christ in Emmaus was presented to the world, the leading expert on Dutch painting, Abraham Breddios, stood before it and wept tears of joy. He called it the masterwork of Vermeer's masterworks. Van Meeren did not just sell a painting, he sold the critics their own dream, the confirmation of their theory. In that moment, he triumphed. But the main act of this drama unfolded later. We are transported to 1940. The Nazis occupy the Netherlands. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, the number 2 man in the Third Reich, is obsessed with collecting art. He longs to own a Vermeer. Göring's agents discover one of Van Meegeren's works, Christ and the Sinner. We see the deal being made. Göring pays an astronomical sum of 1,650,000 guilders for the forgery, a record price for that time. And on top of that, he returns to the Netherlands 200 authentic paintings that had been confiscated by the Nazis. Imagine this irony. One of the most notorious criminals of the century, who considered himself a connoisseur of true Aryan art, hung a fake, smelling of synthetic resin in his residence at Karenhal and took pride in it as his main trophy. Van Meegeren, sipping wine in his mansion, must have laughed until he cried, knowing he had outwitted the very devil himself. The culmination came in 1945 after the liberation of Europe. The Allies found Vermeers in Göring's collection and traced the chain of sales back to Van Meegeren. He was arrested. The charge was severe: treason, selling national heritage to the enemy. He faced the death penalty. And then, standing in the courtroom, backed into a corner, Van Meegeren dropped his mask. We hear his scream echoing off the walls. "You think I'm a traitor? Selling Vermeer to the Nazis? Idiots. I didn't sell national treasures. I sold them a fake that I painted myself. I fooled Göring." Silence hung in the room. No one believed it. Experts whose reputations were on the line insisted it was an original. To save his life, Van Meegeren had to pull off one last incredible performance. The court allowed him to bring paints and canvases directly into his prison cell. Under the supervision of guards and journalists for several weeks, he painted his last Vermeer before the eyes of the world, a painting titled Young Christ Preaching in the Temple. When the final brushstroke was laid, there was no doubt left. The treason charge crumbled. He became not a traitor, but a national hero, a man who outsmarted the Nazis. He was sentenced to only 1 year in prison for fraud, but he died of a heart attack even before serving his term in 1947. This story teaches us that expert opinion is often based on a desire to believe rather than on facts. Van Meegeren showed that the value of art is a subjective concept. If a painting evokes the same emotions as the original, if people are willing to kill for it and pay millions, how important is it whose hand held the brush? A master from the 15th century or a vengeful chemist from the 20th? We leave the studio of the great forger, where dust settles on empty paint cans that Van Meegeren used with a fine brush and human vanity. But our next story will transport us to the Wild West, where the instruments of deception were far coarser and greed even more primitive. We are about to trade velvet and oil for dust, revolvers, and the sparkle of precious stones scattered in the sand, to see how 2 simple prospectors drove the wealthiest bankers in the world to madness. Deception number 4, the Great Diamond Rush in the Desert. We leave the refined Europe and travel to the other side of the world, where the rules are written with a colt, and gentlemanly agreements are sealed with a spit in the dust. We are in San Francisco in the year 1872. The city still remembers the gold rush. Its veins pulse with excitement, and the air in the banks on Montgomery Street is electrified with greed. We stand in the shadow of the massive oak doors of the California Bank. Two men enter. They look out of place among the marble and velvet. Their clothes are covered in a layer of road dust. Their faces are weathered, and their manners are rough. They are Philip Arnold and John Slack, cousins, simple prospectors, or at least that's how they want to appear. In their hands, they clutch a dirty leather bag, which they toss onto the table before the astonished clerks. Inside the bag is gold. There are uncut diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. We are witnessing the beginning of one of the most audacious swindles of the Wild West. The psychology of this deception was played out by the numbers. Arnold and Slack did not ask for money. On the contrary, they played the roles of simple country folks, scared by their find, who just wanted to store the stones. They made the richest people in America, banker William Orlston and financier Esbury Harpending, persuade them to sell a share in this deposit. "We found a mountain covered with stones somewhere in the wilderness of Wyoming," they whispered, glancing around. Investors, whose eyes were dazzled by the shine of the stones, demanded expert assessments. And this is where an element we've seen in the story of Vermeer comes into play: the error of authority. We shift to New York in the office of Charles Tiffany himself, founder of the Tiffany & Company jewelry empire. Tiffany, holding the stones from a dirty sack, delivers his verdict. These are genuine jewels of immense value. He estimates the pile of stones at $150,000, a gigantic sum for that time. If Tiffany himself said yes, who would dare to doubt? No one considered the geological oddity. Diamonds, rubies, and sapphires never occur together in nature. They require completely different conditions for formation, but greed is deaf to science. We see a company being formed with capital of $10 million. Arnold and Slack receive about $600,000 in cash for revealing the location, but before showing the site, they blindfold the investor representatives. 4 days of travel by train, then horseback through cliffs and wastelands. When the blindfolds are removed, the plateau is revealed to the investors. Indeed, just digging with a boot brings diamonds to light. They lie in anthills, are stuck in the cracks of rocks, and sparkle in the bed of a dried-up creek. None of the ecstatic bankers suspected that just a couple of months earlier, Arnold and Slack made a quiet trip to London. There, they bought thousands of flawed industrial diamonds and low-grade rubies for about $35,000. We can picture this realistic scene. Two men in the desert under the blazing sun methodically salted the earth, embedding precious stones in the soil and shooting them with a shotgun into the canyon walls so they'd sink deeper. The scam was perfect. The company's stock soared to the heavens. But, as in any story of deception, there's always someone who looks beyond the glitter and sees the essence. This person was Clarence King, a young and ambitious state geologist. Upon reading reports about the find, King sensed something was amiss. Rubies and diamonds together? That's impossible, he thought. We follow him and his team as they trace the expedition to find that very plateau. King starts digging. He finds diamonds, but then he discovers something that makes him laugh, a bitter laugh of a scientist witnessing human folly. One of the diamonds had signs of having been cut. Nature creates crystals, but nature does not cut them with jewelry tools. Moreover, King noticed that in every square foot of land, there was a precisely defined number of stones, as if someone had measured them by recipe. "This place is finished," read his famous telegram to the investors. The house of cards collapsed instantly. Banker Ralston was ruined and forced to return the money to the depositors from his own pocket. Later, he died under mysterious circumstances while swimming in the bay. Charles Stefani received a blow to his reputation that is still remembered today. But what about our heroes? John Slack disappeared, melted away into the plains, and all traces of him were lost forever, as if the sand had covered them with the wind. Philip Arnold returned to his home in Kentucky, a wealthy man. When he was sued, he innocently claimed he had simply sold his right to the land, and whatever the bankers found or did not find was not his concern. In the end, he settled by paying part of the money and lived the rest of his days in comfort, until he died in a shootout with a rival banker. An ironic ending for a man who started a war of capital. This story is as rough as an uncut diamond. It serves as a lesson that we see what we want to see. Even the most seasoned businessmen forget the basic laws of nature when the specter of easy profit looms before them. We shake the dust of Wyoming off our cloaks. The desert knows how to keep secrets, but cities know how to sell them for even more. If Arnold and Slack sold a non-existent deposit, our next hero went even further. He decided to sell something that everyone could see, something that is a symbol of the nation, something that cannot be hidden in a bag. We are about to travel to Paris in the 20s to meet the most elegant con artist in history who managed to sell 300 meters of iron for scrap. Trick number 5. The Count who sold the Eiffel Tower. We leave the dusty plains of the Wild West and find ourselves in the city of lights, love, and the most refined lies. Paris, May 1925. Europe is nursing its wounds after the Great War. The economy is recovering, and jazz echoes from every basement in Montmartre. We sit at a little cafe table, watching a man in a perfect three-piece suit leisurely perusing the morning newspaper. His name is Victor Lustig, though he is known in the criminal world as the Count. He is the Mozart of fraud, a virtuoso playing on the strings of human vanity. His gaze fixes on a small article on the last page. It states that the Eiffel Tower, built as a temporary structure for the World Exposition, is in a deplorable condition. Rust is eating away at the metal, and the costs for painting and repairs are exorbitant for the city's budget. The journalist rhetorically asks if it wouldn't be simpler to tear it down. For the average reader, this is just an excuse to grumble over morning coffee. For Lustig, it is a revelation. We observe the preparations for the spectacle. Lustig does not concern himself with trivialities. He forges the credentials of the Deputy Director of the Ministry of Post and Telegraph. He sends official invitations to the 5 largest scrap metal dealers in Paris. But pay attention to the detail. He schedules the meeting not at the ministry, which would be too risky, but at the Decrion Hotel, the most luxurious hotel in the city. The psychology is simple. In such interiors, people lose vigilance, overwhelmed by the authority of power and wealth. In a private hotel room, Lustig speaks in whispers. He reveals a state secret to businessmen. The government has decided to dismantle the tower. It is old, dangerous, and aesthetically outdated. At that time, many Parisians truly hated it. He offers them a unique deal, the right of redemption, a ton of first-class metal. Among those gathered, we see André Poisson. He is rich, but he is a newcomer, a provincial who desperately wants to enter the elite of Parisian business. Purchasing the Eiffel Tower will make him a legend. Lustig, a keen psychologist, immediately spots his prey. He sees in Poisson's eyes that very mix of greed and insecurity that is so essential for a successful con. However, at some point, Poisson begins to hesitate. The deal seems too secretive, too hasty. Poisson's wife also suspects something is wrong. Why is the official meeting in a hotel? And here, Lustig makes a move we can call a gambit of corruption. Instead of proving his honesty, he confesses to his dishonesty. We witness this brilliant scene. Lustig shyly confesses to Poisson that the official salary is small and life in Paris is expensive. He hints at a bribe, and oh, surprise, Poisson's face brightens. If the official is asking for a bribe, then he's for real. In Poisson's world, honest people are suspicious, while corrupt ones are understandable and reliable. Paradoxically, it is the admission of a minor crime that made a greater crime possible. Poisson hands Lustig a suitcase filled with cash. Not only payment for the metal, but also a substantial bribe on top. Lustig, maintaining his composure and pocketing the money, immediately boards a train to Vienna. We see him looking out the window at the silhouette of the tower receding into the distance, still standing in its place. The most astonishing aspect of this story is its silence. Days passed, then weeks. Poisson sent his workers to dismantle the tower, and only then realized he had been swindled. But he did not go to the police. The shame of being the man who bought the Eiffel Tower from a con artist proved stronger than the loss of money. He preferred to swallow his indignation rather than become a laughingstock of all Paris. This impunity intoxicated Lustig. A month later, he returned to Paris and tried to sell the tower once again through the same scheme to another dealer. But this time, the victim was smarter and reported him to the police. Lustig had to flee to America, where he ended his days in Alcatraz, outsmarting even Al Capone one last time. The story of Victor Lustig reminds us that sometimes, to make someone believe in the unbelievable, one needs not to elevate oneself, but to descend to their level, showing their weaknesses. Poussin did not believe in the sale of the tower. He believed in the officials' greed because it fit into his worldview. We leave Paris, where the Eiffel Tower still pierces the sky, reminding us that symbols cannot be bought, even if one desperately wants to. But while Lustig manipulated one person in a closed room, the next story will show us the power of the printed word. We transport ourselves across the ocean to New York to learn how one newspaper made millions of people believe that they were not alone in the universe, and to see with our own eyes winged people and unicorns in places where they could not possibly exist. This is Deception number 6, The Great Moon Hoax and Bat People. We leave the elegant boulevards of Paris and plunge into the chaos and noise of mid-19th century New York, specifically in August of 1835. This is a time when science is advancing by leaps and bounds, locomotives begin to slice through space, and the boundaries of possibility are erased with each passing day. In this city, steeped in printer's ink and cheap tobacco, a brutal war is being waged, a war of newspapers. We stand outside the offices of the Sun, watching the man whose pen is about to turn astronomy into a circus. His name is Richard Adams Locke. He is not a scientist. He is a reporter with the imagination of a writer, the creativity of a fantasist, and the cynicism of a marketer. He knows that the public is bored reading about politics and cotton prices. The public craves wonder, and he decides to gift them the greatest marvel of all: life on the moon. We see how on August 25th, the first issue hits the stands with a sensational article. The headline screams about great astronomical discoveries made by Sir John Herschel, the most respected astronomer of the time. Locke brilliantly uses this authority. Herschel is indeed in South Africa at the Cape of Good Hope, observing the stars, but there is no way to reach him, and verifying the information is impossible. This provides Locke with the perfect alibi and a time gap. The anatomy of this lie is built on pseudoscientific detailing. We read the article along with astonished New Yorkers. Locke describes a new revolutionary giant telescope weighing 7 tons, the lenses of which were supposedly cast from the latest type of glass. He bombards readers with terms, angles of refraction, and descriptions of hydroxy-oxygen microscopes. The reader, stunned by the scientific jargon, ceases to doubt and simply opens their mouth in amazement. At first, Locke was cautious. In the initial issues, he described lunar landscapes, basalt cliffs, valleys filled with red flowers, and herds of animals resembling bison, but with a visor over their eyes to protect them from bright light. We can feel the tension mounting. The newspaper's circulation soars to the heavens. All of New York, from dock workers to professors at Yale University, is discussing the lunar bison. But Locke, tasting the blood of fame, goes further. In subsequent issues, intelligent beavers make their appearance. Yes, you heard that right. Beavers that walk on 2 legs, live in lodges, kindle fires, demonstrating their intelligence, and carry their young in their front paws. It seems absurd, but by that point, the critical thinking of the crowd had been completely paralyzed by the authority of the scientific report. The climax arrives when Locke describes Vespertilio Homo, the Batman. We see engravings printed in the newspaper. Creatures with wings covered in fur calmly converse at temples with roofs made of pure sapphire. Locke imbues them with angelic innocence and describes their lives with such conviction, as if he himself had sipped tea with them in the tranquil crater. The psychology of this phenomenon is unique. People in 1835 lived in an era when yesterday's magic was becoming today's technology. If we were able to build a steam locomotive, why couldn't we see inhabitants of the moon? The desire to believe that we are not alone in the universe turned out to be stronger than common sense. The newspaper The Sun became the best-selling publication in the world, even surpassing London's The Times. Its circulation reached 19,000 copies, an incredible number for that time. The funniest and most tragic part of this story is the reaction from the scientific community. Scientists loudly cried out that it was a lie. They went to the Sun's office to request a look at the original reports from Herschel. We see how Locke leads them around, sending them from one printing house to another, until they finally realize they have become victims of a prank. When the bubble burst, something remarkable happened. The mob did not storm the office. People did not demand their pennies back. They laughed. New York acknowledged that this was the best story they had ever been told. This was the first case in history where fake news became a form of mass entertainment. The only person who was furious was the writer Edgar Allan Poe. At that time, he was writing his story about a journey to the moon, an extraordinary adventure of a certain Hans Pfaall, and he accused Locke of plagiarism and ruining his literary plans. What about Sir John Herschel? The poor astronomer only learned about his discoveries months later when newspapers were sent to him in Africa. They say he first laughed, but then complained for many years that questions about moon inhabitants haunted him more than inquiries about his actual scientific work. This story reveals an important truth. Sometimes, a lie is so beautiful and desirable that the truth seems dull and unnecessary alongside it. Locke sold people a dream that the cosmos is inhabited and full of wonders. We put down the yellowed newspaper with images of lunar temples. Looking at the sky will never be the same again. But while Locke made people look up and see what was not there, our next hero made them look down and see what was created by rough human hands, presenting it as an ancient miracle. We are set to travel to a farm in the state of New York to witness the birth of a giant that split America into believers and skeptics, and to learn how a stone can yield more money than gold. This is deception number 7, the Cardiff Giant. We leave the bustling streets of New York and head north to the tranquil, rural wilderness. It is October 1869. We stand in the middle of a muddy field on William Newell's farm near the town of Cardiff. The air here smells of damp earth and decaying leaves. 2 workers, hired to dig a well, monotonously toss dirt with their shovels. Suddenly, a dull sound rings out. Metal strikes stone. But this is not just a boulder. We lean over the hole and see a pale, gigantic human leg emerging from the clay. The workers, horrified, drop their shovels. Gradually, inch by inch, they bring to light the body of a petrified man. His height exceeds 3 meters. His face is contorted in a grimace of pain. One hand is pressed against his abdomen, as if in his final moments he endured unbearable agony. This is the Cardiff Giant. The news spreads faster than a wildfire. Evidence of biblical truth has been found. There were giants on the earth in those days, local pastors quote from the book of Genesis while gazing at the stone wonder. But we know that we are not standing before a wonder of nature, but rather before a monument to human vengeance and greed. Behind this find looms the figure of George Hull, a tobacco trader and staunch atheist. The anatomy of this deception did not start with a shovel, but with a theological dispute. A year earlier, Hull had a falling out with a Methodist minister who insisted that the Bible should be taken literally. Infuriated by his opponent's stubbornness, Hull decided, if they are willing to believe in tales about giants, I will give them a giant and make them pay for it. We observe how meticulously this hoax was prepared. Hull purchased a massive block of gypsum in Iowa, lying that it was needed for a monument to Abraham Lincoln. He transported it to Chicago, where he hired German stonecutters. Hull himself posed for the statue, giving it his features, but merely carving the figure wasn't enough. To deceive science, it was necessary to age the stone. We see the conspirators treating the statue with sulfuric acid to make it appear weathered with age. But the most brilliant touch was the pores. Hull prepared a special hammer with needles and for hours struck the statue, imitating the texture of human skin. Then the giant was secretly transported to his cousin Newell's farm, buried, and left to ripen for a year, allowing roots to wrap around it and create an illusion of antiquity. When the find was unveiled to the public, hysteria ensued. People paid 50 cents, huge money for farmers of that time, just to take a glimpse at the giant. Newell's farm turned into a pilgrimage site. On weekends, up to 3,000 people would visit. We see Hull standing aside, smoking a cigar and counting the profits. He sold a share in the giant to a syndicate of businessmen for $37,500. Scientists and clergy divided into two camps. The clergy saw in the giant a confirmation of faith. Some ideologues, confused by the skin textures, cautiously suggested that it could be an ancient statue. But the real spectacle began when the great showman Phineas Taylor Barnum entered the scene. Smelling the scent of money, Barnum offered to buy the giant for $60,000. The syndicate refused. What did Barnum do? He hired a sculptor, created an exact copy of the giant, and exhibited it in his museum in New York, claiming that he had the genuine original while the Cardiff giant was a mere counterfeit. Imagine the absurdity of the situation. Crowds of people paid money to see a copy of a counterfeit. A dispute arose over whose fake giant was the real one. It was a battle of two realms of illusion. The end of this comedy came from paleontologist Elmer Ostrander Charles Marsh. He did not seek biblical meanings. He simply chipped off a piece of the giant and saw fresh, unweathered gypsum. "This is the most decisive hoax of the century," he declared. Soon, the stone cutters from Chicago began to talk. Howell was not troubled by the exposure. He proved his point. People will believe anything if it flatters their beliefs. He walked away from the game a rich man. The giant, after touring the country, found his rest in a farmer's museum in Cooperstown, where he lies today, a monument to human gullibility. This story teaches us that the line between belief and fact blurs when the desire for a miracle comes into play. Hal simply gave people what they wanted to see in their land, confirmation that their world is more significant and ancient than it seems. We leave the stone idol in the museum's silence, but if a simple tobacconist in America can fool a nation with a piece of plaster, the stakes will be much higher in our next story. We will cross the ocean and return to Victorian England to witness the loudest trial of the 19th century. There, a simple butcher from Australia will attempt to steal not just money, but a name, a title, and a lineage from an ancient aristocratic family, dividing society into two irreconcilable camps. Trick number 8. The butcher who stole a title and split an empire. We leave the American backwoods to dive into the thick yellow fog of Victorian London. Here, amid gas lamps and cobbled streets, unfolds a drama that captivated the minds of the entire British Empire for decades. We are in the mid-60s of the 19th century. This is a story of maternal grief that proved stronger than reason and of audacity that borders on madness. At the center of the plot is the ancient and fabulously wealthy Tichborne family. The heir to the fortune, Sir Roger Tichborne, disappeared at sea in 1854. His ship, the Bella, sank off the coast of South America. No wreckage, no bodies. To the world he was dead, but not to his mother. Lady Henrietta Tichborne refused to extinguish hope. She sent out announcements worldwide, offering a generous reward for any news about her son. She lit a beacon, and from the dusty outback of Australia, a letter arrived from the town of Wagga Wagga. A man calling himself Thomas Castro, a humble butcher, claimed, "I am lost, Sir Roger." We stand in the hall of a Parisian hotel, where the mother and son are about to meet. This scene is worthy of a surrealist's brush. The real Roger was a slender, elegant young man with dark hair who spoke French better than English and had the manners of a prince. The man who entered the door weighed 120 kilograms. He was a mountain of blubber and coarseness. He had light hair. He remembered not a word of French, even though Roger had spent his entire childhood in Paris and spoke with a common accent. Any sensible person would have called the police, but we witnessed the disturbing power of self-deception. Lady Tichborne, glancing at this giant, rushed into his arms, exclaiming, "Oh, my poor dear Roger, how you have changed!" She gave him the most important weapon of a con artist, recognition. She opened to him access to the family archives, diaries, and accounts. The true name of the impostor was Arthur Orton, the son of a London trader, who ran away to sea and became a butcher in Australia. But now, having gained access to information, he began to play his role expertly. We see him recalling details of his childhood that he learned the day before from letters from his mother. He finds old servants and regimental comrades of Roger, treats them to drinks, catches them in slip-ups, and uses these morsels of knowledge to convince others. England was split in two. The Tichborne family, except for the mother, declared war on him, viewing him as a vulgar impostor. But the common people? Oh, the people loved him. For the working class of London, Sir Roger became a symbol of justice. They saw in him a victim of an elite conspiracy. "Our big fellow," they shouted in the streets. People believed that the aristocrats wanted to strip the legitimate heir of his rights, simply because he had roughened up while living among ordinary folks. Orton became a hero of folklore, and we see how thousands of people chipped in a penny to support his defense fund. The House of Cards began to collapse when Lady Tichborne died. Losing his main defender, Orton was left face to face with the relentless machine of British justice. A civil trial began, lasting 102 days. The lawyers of the Tichborne family literally crucified him during cross-examination. We find ourselves in a stuffy courtroom. A lawyer asked Orton about the contents of a sealed letter that the real Roger had left for his cousin before departing. The letter spoke of love for the cousin and about building a church if he married her. Unbeknownst to him, Orton claimed that the letter was about seducing his cousin. This was a fatal mistake, offending the lady's honor and showing that he did not know the most intimate secrets of his own life. But the final blow came from a tattoo. The real Roger had a tattoo of a heart, an anchor, and a cross on his arm. Orton did not have it. He tried to argue that it had disappeared, but the forensic science of that time already knew that tattoos do not vanish without a trace. Moreover, witnesses from Australia identified the butcher Arthur Orton in Barnet. The jury returned a verdict of guilty of perjury. Orton was sentenced to 14 years of hard labor. However, even after the verdict, the myth did not die. We see a paradox. While Orton toiled in prison, his supporters held rallies, gathering tens of thousands of people in Hyde Park. The psychology of the crowd is such that admitting a mistake is harder than continuing to believe in a beautiful lie. People did not want to believe that their hero was just a common fraud. They liked the tale of the prodigal son returning. Upon his release from prison, Orton was broken. He confessed to the deception for a few £1,000s, selling his confession to a newspaper, but then retracted his admission, trying to regain the love of the public. He died in poverty on the 1st of April, 1898, a symbolic date for the King of Fools. Ironically, his gravestone read, Sir Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne. Even in death, he did not relinquish the stolen name. This story teaches us that sorrow makes us blind, and class hatred makes us deaf to the facts. Lady Tichborne saw her son because she could not bear the thought of his death. The crowd saw a hero because they hated the wealthy. Orton was merely a mirror in which everyone saw what they wanted. We are closing the Tichborne case. It was a scam, built on emotions and family secrets. But our next story will raise the stakes to the heavens. We are transported to France on the eve of revolution to see how a single schemer managed to steal the most precious necklace in the world, cloaking herself in the name of the Queen, and thereby propelled the monarchy toward its demise at the guillotine. Deception number 9. The necklace that decapitated the Queen. We leave the misty London and travel to Versailles in the year 1785. Here, the air is laden with the scent of powder, intrigue, and an impending storm. France balances on the brink of disaster. The people are starving, while at court, a never-ending ball of hypocrisy continues. We stand in the shadow of the mirror halls and watch a woman whose greed will become the very spark that ignites the fuse of the great French Revolution. Her name is Jeanne de la Motte. She claims that royal blood from the Valois dynasty runs through her veins, but in reality, she lives on the edge of poverty, possessing only the title of countess and boundless ambition. Jeanne understands the key rule of Versailles. To gain power, one must create the illusion of closeness to power. Her target becomes Cardinal de Rohan. Cardinal de Rohan is wealthy, noble, but unhappy. He has fallen out of favor with Queen Marie Antoinette and is willing to do anything to regain her affection. Jeanne becomes his guide. She convinces the cardinal that she is a close friend of the queen. We see how she brings him letters, supposedly penned by Marie Antoinette herself, filled with vague allusions to forgiveness. The cardinal, blinded by hope, fails to notice that the Queen of France never signed her name as Marie Antoinette French. This is a glaring mistake by the forger, but the desire to believe is stronger than the grammar of etiquette. To finally secure the hook, Jeannie arranges a midnight meeting in the Grove of Venus in the gardens of Versailles. We observe this scene from behind the bushes. Darkness, the rustle of dresses, the quickened breath of the cardinal. A figure in white approaches him, hands over a rose, and whispers, "You know what this means?" The cardinal falls to her feet, convinced that he is before the queen. In reality, it is the maid Nicole Liddy, hired by Jeanne for a pittance to play this role, resembling Marie Antoinette in figure. Now, with the fish on the hook, Jeannie turns to the main course. The matter at hand is the diamond necklace. This is not just an ornament, it is a monster, made of 647 flawless diamonds totaling 2,800 carats. Boehmer and Bassench had been crafting it for years, hoping to sell it to Louis XV for his mistress, but the king died. Now the necklace is worth 1.5 million livres, the price of several castles or the outfitting of an entire fleet. Marie Antoinette had already rejected it, deeming the price indecent. Jeanne tells the cardinal, the queen secretly wishes to buy the necklace but cannot do so officially due to the complex economic situation. She asks the cardinal to become her secret intermediary. Rogan, seeing this as a chance to finally become the favorite, agrees. He takes the necklace from the jewelers under his guarantees, promising that the queen will pay the amount in installments. We witness the climax of this audacity. The cardinal hands over the box with the treasure to a man he believes to be the queen's lackey. In reality, it is Jeanne's husband. As soon as the doors close, they barbarically break the necklace apart. Jeanne's husband heads to London, where he begins selling the diamonds one by one. The plan was simple. When the time came to pay, and the queen claimed she purchased nothing, the cardinal would save his honor by paying himself. But Jeannie underestimated the scale of the situation. The jewelers, not receiving the first payment, went directly to the queen. Marie Antoinette, hearing that she supposedly bought this madness through the man she despised, flew into a rage. Instead of burying the scandal, King Louis XVI made a fatal mistake. He ordered the arrest of the cardinal right in the Hall of Mirrors before the entire court while he was preparing to serve a mass. It was a shock. The arrest of a prince of the church. Then Jeanne was also captured. A trial began that all of Europe was watching, and here something unexpected happened. The people of France, already hating the Austrian Marie Antoinette, decided that the queen was guilty. The public believed that she had indeed used the cardinal to obtain the diamonds and then set him up. Jean de la Motte, this con artist, suddenly became a victim of royal arbitrary actions. The court acquitted the cardinal, which was a slap in the face to the king, while Jeanne was sentenced to whipping, branding with the letter W for thief, and life imprisonment. But the damage was done. The reputation of the monarchy was destroyed. In street pamphlets, Marie Antoinette was called Madame Deficit and the Diamond Thief. Historians agree that the necklace affair became the mud that was thrown at the throne, stripping it of its sacredness. A few years later, when the queen was led to the guillotine, the crowd remembered not the politics but this cursed necklace instead. By the way, Jeannie escaped from prison, disguising herself as a man in London, where she wrote memoirs, smearing the queen, and eventually fell from a window while fleeing from creditors. A strange and tragic ending. This story teaches us that the lie of one con artist can change the course of history for an entire state if the ground for distrust has already been prepared. The diamonds disappeared, but their brilliance blinded France so much that it stopped seeing its rulers as people worthy of respect. We closed the box housing the ghosts of the diamonds. Jeanne's greed cost the monarchy its life, But the next story will show us the flip side of the coin. If here the con artist used the queen's name, then our next hero used the name of God to create a state within a state. We are about to travel to China in the 19th century to see how a failed examination rural teacher declared himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ and unleashed one of the bloodiest wars in human history. Trick number 10. The self-proclaimed brother of Christ, drowning China in blood. We leave behind the splendor of Versailles and the scent of French perfume to immerse ourselves in the stifling and humid fog of southern China in the mid-19th century. Here, the air is heavy with the smell of opium, rotting rice, and despair. The Qing Empire is cracking under the strain, humiliated by European powers, while the people groan beneath the weight of taxes. We find ourselves in the city of Guangzhou, in a cramped room where a young man thrashes in feverish delirium. His name is Hong Xiuquan. He is a village teacher and a failure, whose life has been shattered by a cruel bureaucratic machine. He has tried 3 times to pass the imperial examination for officials, the sole path to success in China at that time, and has failed each time. A nervous breakdown has confined him to bed for 40 days. In this delirium, a vision appears to him. An old man with a golden beard hands him a sword to exterminate demons, while a middle-aged man, calling him younger brother, teaches him how to fight. When Hong awakens, he is a changed man. But the true deception that altered history is born shortly after, when he comes across a Christian pamphlet issued by missionaries. Upon reading it, Hong realizes that the old man was God the Father, the middle-aged man was Jesus Christ, and he, Hong Xiuquan, is the new Messiah, the younger brother of Jesus, sent to save China. The psychology of this lie is unique, in that its author likely believed in it himself. However, how he used this belief would become the greatest manipulation in Asian history. Hong began to preach not humility, but fury. He declared the ruling Manchu dynasty to be demons that needed to be destroyed. To the impoverished peasants, miners, and outcasts, this was exactly what they wanted to hear. They were promised a heavenly kingdom on earth, the Taiping Tianguo, where all are equal, where there are neither rich nor poor, where land is shared equally. We watch as this spark ignites into a raging fire. The God-worshippers' society transforms into an army. Fanatics, convinced of their invincibility, grow long hair as a sign of defiance against the Manchus, who mandated that they wear queues, and they charge into battle with red armbands on their heads. The discipline is ironclad. The slightest transgression results in execution. In 1853, the Taipings capture Nanjing, the second most important city of the empire, and declare it their capital. Hong Xiuquan builds himself a lavish palace, and here we see the monstrous hypocrisy of any totalitarian cult. While preaching asceticism and chastity, Hong forbids his followers to marry and even separates families. Men live in one barracks, women in another. Sex is punishable by death. Yet the heavenly king maintains a harem of concubines. He lives in a golden cage surrounded by women, while his soldiers die for his delirious whims. The scale of this deception is staggering. It was not merely a sect, it was an alternative state that lasted 14 years. Initially, Western powers even considered supporting the Taipings, viewing them as Christians. But when they learned that Hong claimed to be Jesus' brother and was rewriting the Bible to suit his needs, they were horrified and assisted government troops in quelling the rebellion. The end was horrific. When in 1864 government forces besieged Nanjing, a famine broke out in the city. Huni Xuanyi, having completely lost touch with reality, claimed that God would send them heavenly manna. He ordered people to eat grass and weeds, calling them sweet dew. According to one version, he died from poisoning by this very manna. According to another, he took poison upon realizing his failure. When the city fell, a massacre began. The Taiping preferred death to captivity. We walk through the streets of Nanking and our feet slip in blood. This civil war, born from the hallucination of one loser, claimed lives estimated between 20 and 30 million people. This is more than the number who died in World War I. Entire provinces were depopulated. China's economy was thrown back decades. The story of Huni Xuanyi is a grim reminder of what happens when personal complexes and grievances against the world are dressed in religious form. People followed him, not because they believed in his divinity, but because they had nothing to lose, and the beautiful lie of equality was sweetened by the bitter truth and the courageous existence. We leave the ruins of Nanking, where the smoke of the fires mixes with the fog. Huni Xuanyi used faith and an army. But our next story will prove that to bring an entire system to its knees, millions of soldiers are not needed. Just one old, worn uniform and a confident voice will suffice. We are about to travel to Prussia at the beginning of the 20th century, into a world of perfect order, to see how one old cobbler, with not a penny to his name, captured the city hall and arrested the mayor, simply by correctly saluting. Trick number 11. The cobbler who seized the city with a second-hand uniform. We leave the smoldering ruins of China and transport ourselves to the heart of Europe, into a world where order is elevated to an absolute. Prussia, October 1906. Here, under the gray low sky, the rhythm of life is set by the sound of boots on cobblestones. This is a society where a man out of uniform is a nobody, and a uniform is a deity. We stand on a Berlin street, observing an elderly man with a weary face and a stooped back. His name is Wilhelm Voigt. He is a cobbler who has spent most of his life in prisons for petty thefts. Now he is unemployed, homeless, and, worst of all, without a passport. The bureaucratic machine of Prussia has cornered him. Without a permanent address, he cannot find work, and without work, he cannot secure a permanent address. The police order him to leave Berlin, but no other city will accept him. He is an invisible man, a rat cornered. But this rat has a brilliant plan, based on a deep understanding of the German soul. Voigt goes to a second-hand shop and buys a captain's uniform of the Prussian army in parts. Notice that the uniform is put together haphazardly, the cap is crumpled, and the jacket is not quite the right size. In any other country, he would be exposed within a minute, but Voigt knows that in Prussia, no one looks at an officer's face, everyone looks at the epaulets. On October 16th, we witness a theater of the absurd. Donning the uniform, Voigt steps out onto the street. He sees a squad of guards returning from the shooting range. He simply commands them, "Attention, follow me." And magic happens. The soldiers do not ask for documents. They see a captain, the click of heels, and they turn to follow the stranger. Voigt stops another squad. Now under his command is a whole little army. They board a train and head to the suburb of Berlin-Kienig. We see how the passengers respectfully step aside for the captain, offering him schnapps. No one notices that the officer speaks in a coarse dialect, and his manners are far from aristocratic. The uniform dazzled them all. Upon arriving in Kienig, Voigt leads his soldiers to the town hall. He sets sentries at the doors and orders the arrest of the gendarmes guarding the building. The gendarmes comply. Then, the captain bursts into the office of Mayor Georg Langerhans. Imagine the horror of the official when the officer announces his arrest by order of His Majesty the Emperor. The mayor does not even ask to see a warrant. In his world, a command from a person in uniform is not up for discussion. Voigt orders the treasurer to hand over all cash. He is given about 4,000 marks. While the mayor is escorted to Berlin, his wife, a touching detail, asks for permission to send warm clothing with him. Voigt commands the other officials to stay in place. He calmly goes to the train station, changes into civilian clothes in the restroom, and disappears with the money. The psychology behind this crime is the diagnosis of an entire nation. Voigt used not a weapon, but automatic obedience. The Germans had been so drilled to obey authority that their brains shut down at the sight of shiny buttons. Power belongs not to the person, but to the uniform. When the deception was revealed, and Voigt was turned in by his former cellmate, who knew of the plans, Germany laughed. The whole country laughed until they cried. Even Kaiser Wilhelm II, upon hearing about this, was not angry, but proudly declared, "Look at our discipline. No other nation in the world can obey like that." Voigt became a national hero. He was tried and given 4 years in prison, but the Kaiser personally pardoned him before his term was up. The captain from Kienik walked out of prison a star. He traveled across Europe, handing out autographs, taking photos in that very uniform. A wealthy man, thanks to donations from rich widows, charmed by his audacity. He died in Luxembourg, and to this day, a monument in the shape of a Prussian officer stands at his grave. This story is a caustic satire on a society where appearance is more important than substance. Voigt showed that if you look like authority and speak like authority, people will willingly hand you the keys to the city, even if you are an old cobbler with a criminal record. We leave the amusing old man Voigt enjoying his fame. He forged an identity using clothing, but in a world of big money, clothing is too trivial. In our next story, we will meet a man who decided to forge not himself, but the very foundation of the economy. We are heading to Lisbon in the 20s to meet a con artist who nearly brought down the state by printing so much real money that it could buy all of Portugal. Scam number 12. The man who printed himself a country. We leave the amusing captain from Kienik and his toy army to dive into the world of real power, where battles are fought not on parade grounds, but in stock market reports, and where the weapon is not a rifle, but a printing press. We are in Lisbon in the year 1925. Portugal is a country with a great past and a troubled present. The economy lies in ruins, political instability has become the norm, and there hangs in the air a longing for lost imperial grandeur. In this murky pond swims a very large fish. His name is Arthur Virgilio Alves dos Reis. He is young, charming, impeccably dressed, and his eyes burn with the fire of a man who sees opportunities where others see only problems. Reis is not just a swindler, he is a financial architect. His audacity knows no bounds. He does not intend to print money in a basement. That's too dirty and petty. He plans to make the official printer of the Bank of Portugal do it for him. We witness the birth of a plan that is unparalleled in its audacity. Reis has grasped a fundamental truth. The most convincing lie is the one that consists almost entirely of truth. He is not creating counterfeit banknotes. He is using real templates, real paper, and real artisans. His target is the company Waterloo and SS in London, the very firm that prints Portuguese escudos under an official contract. The anatomy of this scheme is a masterpiece of bureaucratic fear. Reis does not arrive with a bag of money. He comes with a folder of documents. We see him and his accomplices creating a fake contract, supposedly on behalf of the manager of the Bank of Portugal. The contract speaks of a secret mission. The government of Portugal wants to issue a huge private loan for the development of a colony in Mongolia, but it needs to be done in secret to avoid crashing the escudo's value. For this, new banknotes are required, identical to the old ones, but with a small mark so they can be tracked. The psychology of deception is built on colonial thinking and British propriety. The directors of Waterloo and SS see respectable gentlemen before them. Reis has enlisted foreign accomplices who play the roles of diplomats discussing imperial development. The story sounds logical. Secrecy is very much in the spirit of high politics. Why would they verify the authenticity of the contract, risking offending representatives of England's oldest ally? We see them shaking hands. The deal is done. And soon money begins to arrive in Portugal, not in suitcases, but in official containers through legal channels. 200,000 banknotes with a face value of 500 escudos. 100 million escudos represent almost 1% of Portugal's gross domestic product at the time. This money is absolutely real. It smells of fresh ink. It crinkles as it should. The only problem is, it should not exist. But just having a mountain of money is not enough. It needs to be laundered. And here Reis makes his most brilliant move. He establishes his own bank, the Bank of Mongolia and the Metropolis. He injects his printed money into it and begins to work economic wonders. His bank offers loans at laughable interest rates, buys stocks, and invests in industry. For a time, Reis becomes a national hero, a financial savior single-handedly lifting the economy of the country. But such a fairy tale cannot last forever. Competitors are enraged. How can this upstart afford such generosity? Rumors begin to circulate. And then, as always, chance plays a role. A simple bank teller in the city of Porto noticed something strange. He came into possession of two banknotes with identical serial numbers. This was impossible. It was like seeing two identical people in one room. An investigation was launched. Journalists and newspapers of Oculo uncovered the story. When an article exposing the scandal was published on December 24, 1925, Portugal erupted. Panic ensued. People rushed to banks to exchange their money, not knowing which bills were genuine and which were forged. The economy that had been so ostentatiously lifted collapsed in an instant. The value of the escudo plummeted. Reicha was arrested. In court, he acted like a rock star, claiming he acted for the good of the homeland. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but the consequences of his fraud were far worse than just an economic collapse. This scandal ultimately undermined the confidence of the Portuguese people in their democratic government. Chaos and distrust created the perfect conditions for the military coup of 1926, which in turn brought dictator Antonio de Salazar to power, who would rule the country for almost half a century. This story teaches us that the greatest catastrophes are born not from brute force, but from subtle deception. The greed of one person, multiplied by the credulity of the system, did not just steal money, it helped to kill democracy. We close the banking book, where real numbers are mingled with fictional ones. Reicha flooded the world with genuine paper that became worthless. Our next story is about a man who took worthless paper and turned it into a priceless treasure. He didn't forge banknotes, he forged the soul of a nation, its ancient poetry. We are about to journey back to 15th century Scotland to witness the birth of a great bard who never existed. Trick number 13. The poet born in the mist, who conquered Europe. We leave the stifling offices of Portuguese banks and transport ourselves to the foggy and windswept expanses of the Highlands in Scotland. It is the mid-16th century, the year 1760. Scotland still mourns the defeat of the Jacobite uprising. Its proud spirit is crushed. Ancient traditions are banned, and the Gaelic language is deemed a tongue of savages. A thirst for national revival hangs in the air, a dream of lost, heroic past. And at this moment, a young man steps onto the stage to offer the Scots not just a dream, but an epic. His name is James Macpherson. He is a humble village teacher and budding poet. Yet we see in his eyes not only the spark of creativity, but also a sly gleam of an ambitious hoaxer. Macpherson knows that to be heard, one must speak with the voice of great ancestors. He starts small. We witness him publishing fragments of ancient poetry collected from the hills of Scotland. These are short, melancholic pieces filled with mists, the ghosts of fallen warriors, and tragic love. Macpherson claims that these are translations from the Gaelic language, fragments of a lost epic created in the 2nd century by a great blind bard named Ossian. The Scottish intelligentsia is ecstatic. Finally, here is the proof that their culture rivals that of ancient Greece. They have their own Homer. Macpherson is given funds and sent on an expedition through the Highlands to find and translate the remaining parts of the epic. We follow him through the heather moors. But instead of sitting in archives or interviewing elders, Macpherson locks himself in the rooms of inns. He takes several authentic Gaelic ballads, generously dilutes them with biblical motifs, adds a touch of grandeur from Milton, spices it all up with the fashionable sentimentality of the time, and creates his own poems. Soon, Fingal and Tamora are published. These are no longer fragments, they are full-fledged epic poems, recounting the exploits of King Fingal and his son, the tragic bard Ossian. Macpherson's poetry is magnificent. It is rhythmic, vivid, and full of the noble savagery that the Enlightenment so cherished. The psychology behind this deception hits the nerve of the times perfectly. Europe is tired of cold rationalism. It craves passion, nature, and heroic pasts. And Ossian gives it all of that. We see how all of Europe goes wild. Napoleon Bonaparte carries a volume of Ossian with him in all his military campaigns. Goethe weaves quotes from it into his novel The Sorrows of Young Werther, moving an entire generation of romantics to weep over the Scottish heroes. Thomas Jefferson declares that Ossian is the greatest poet in history. Macpherson becomes a literary superstar, but with fame come doubts. We hear the growing murmur of skeptics, the foremost of whom is the formidable Dr. Samuel Johnson, the very same who befriended our hero Salmanazar. Johnson, with his iron logic, demands that Macpherson present the original Gaelic manuscripts, and here Macpherson makes a mistake. Instead of simply saying that the manuscripts are lost, he starts to twist and turn. He shows some fragments that turn out to be forgeries. He claims that only he can read the originals. He even tries to retroactively translate his English verses into Gaelic, but it comes out awkward and unnatural. The dispute over Ossian turns into a national battle. For the Scots, to doubt Ossian is to betray their homeland. For the English, to expose him means to put the proud Scots in their place. But Macpherson, now a wealthy and influential member of Parliament, provides no decisive proof until his death. He bequeaths that he be buried in Westminster Abbey, in the Poets' Corner near Shakespeare and Chaucer, and his wish is fulfilled. Only decades later, when a special commission meticulously examined all the facts, was the verdict rendered. The poems of Ossian are a brilliant literary hoax. Macpherson did not translate the epic, he created it. Yet here's the paradox. Even after the exposure, the magic of Ossian did not vanish. His poems inspired an entire generation of artists, composers, and writers. They became a catalyst for Romanticism in Europe, and most importantly, helped the Scots rediscover their national pride. The lie proved to be so beautiful that the truth beside it seemed ugly and unnecessary. This story teaches us that sometimes a forgery can be more valuable than the original, especially if the original never existed. Macpherson gave the nation what it desperately needed, a heroic myth to help it survive. We leave Macpherson resting in Westminster under the weight of marble slabs and lies that became truth. He created a fictional hero to lift the spirit of his nation. But our next story is about a man who created a fictional enemy that almost sparked a war between two great powers. We are transported to Spain at the end of the 19th century, on the brink of the Spanish-American War, to see how a single forged letter written in a Cuban tavern changed the fate of an entire empire. Deception number 14, a diplomatic bomb in an envelope. We leave behind the Scottish mists and debates over ancient poetry to dive into the sticky, suffocating heat of Havana. It is February 1998. Cuba is a powder keg. The once great Spanish colonial empire is agonizing, desperately clinging to its last Caribbean jewel. American newspapers, especially the empire of yellow journalism led by William Arundel Hearst, scream about the atrocities committed by the Spaniards and call for intervention. In Havana Harbor, like a steel ghost, sits the American battleship Maine, its guns silently watching over the city. We find ourselves in the dim light of a post office. We see a hand in the shadows glide across the table and pull out a single letter from a pile of diplomatic mail. This is not a robbery for money. It is an act of espionage that will cost thousands of lives. The letter is written by Enrique Dupuy de Lome, the Spanish ambassador to Washington, and addressed to his friend in Havana. It is a private letter filled with candid cynicism that diplomats allow themselves only among their peers. In this letter, de Lome mocks American President William McKinley. He calls him a wimp and a seeker of public admiration, and hints that all peace negotiations Spain is conducting with the United States are merely a tactical ploy to deceive the Americans. This letter is dynamite. The hand that stole it belongs to a Cuban rebel. He immediately hands it over to those who know how to turn this dynamite into a bomb, to the editors of the New York Journal. We are transported to New York, to Hearst's office. We see him reading the translation of the letter, and a predatory fire ignites in his eyes. He realizes this is not just a sensation, it is the pretext for the war he craves. On February 9th, the newspaper hits the stands with a giant headline on the front page: "The worst insult in the history of the United States." The anatomy of this deception lies not in the forgery, but in the context. The letter was authentic, but when torn from private correspondence and presented as Spain's official position, it became a weapon of mass destruction. The psychology of the crowd worked flawlessly. It is one thing to read about the sufferings of the Cubans, and another to hear a foreign ambassador insult your president and your nation. The honor of the nation has been insulted. The pride of Americans, this young, brash, and ambitious nation, has been trampled. The Spanish government is in a panic. Delhomme immediately resigns. Madrid offers official apologies, but the machinery of war is already in motion. Hearst fuels the fire every day, and just 6 days after the publication of the letter, something terrible happens. On the night of February 15th, the battleship Maine explodes in Havana Harbor. 266 American sailors perish. We still do not know the exact cause of the explosion. Most modern historians believe it was an unfortunate accident caused by spontaneous combustion of coal dust in the magazine. But in 1898, no one wanted to hear about accidents. Delhomme's letter had already painted a picture of a treacherous enemy. The explosion became proof of this treachery. Lies created a motive, and tragedy provided a pretext. The cry, "Remember the Maine! To hell with Spain!" becomes the battle cry. Within 2 months, America declares war. A short and victorious war ends in the collapse of the Spanish Empire. Spain loses Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The United States steps onto the world stage as a new imperial power. And all of this happened because of one careless letter, stolen from a tavern in Havana. This chilling story serves as a lesson about how the media can manipulate public opinion, turning private words into a casus belli. It is the great-grandfather of modern fake news and hacker leaks, proving that the pen, empowered by the printing press, can indeed be mightier than the sword. If this letter became a weapon in the hands of an entire nation, our next story is about a man who became a weapon himself. He fought not with guns, but with parchment and wax. His goal was not to humiliate the president, but to steal an entire state. We will travel to the Wild West to witness how a single adventurer, using forged medieval documents, almost became the sole owner of all of Arizona. Deception number 15. The Baron who forged the past and nearly stole a state. We leave Havana, where one letter changed the course of war, and head to a land where laws are written not with ink, but with the smoke from a revolver's barrel. Arizona, the 1880s. This is not a state, it is wild territory, a land of dust, much like hope. People come seeking silver, land, and freedom. But we are here to meet a man who came for everything at once. His name is James Addison Rivas. He does not look like a prospector or cowboy. He is a gentleman, tall, with a well-groomed beard, dressed in an expensive suit. He speaks softly, but in his eyes there is steel. In his hands, he holds not a rifle, but something far more deadly, a yellowed parchment with Spanish coats of arms and wax seals. This document, he claims, is a land grant issued by the Spanish king in the 16th century to a certain Baron Medel de Arta, and this grant gives him the right to possess 12 million acres of land. That is almost all of Arizona and a piece of New Mexico. We watch the reactions of the people. First, laughter, but that laughter quickly turns to fear. Rivas is not just waving a piece of paper. He presents hundreds of pages of evidence, maps, decrees, genealogies. He demands that everyone who lives on his land, from farmers to railroad magnates and silver kings, either pay him tribute or leave. The anatomy of this deceit is astonishing in its scale and devilish intricacy. This is not merely a forgery, it is the creation of an alternative universe. We follow Rivas on his journeys. He travels to the archives of Madrid and Guadalajara, but he is not simply slipping in fakes. He is a surgeon of history. We watch as he carefully, with a scalpel, unravels ancient tomes, inserts his artificially aged pages, written in faded ink, and then reassembles the books using old threads. He was not just drawing on paper, he was weaving threads of lies into the very fabric of history, making it indistinguishable from the truth. But Rivas's masterstroke is psychology. He understood that he needed a living heir, and he created one. He found a poor orphan, Sofia Laredo, in California, and convinced her, and perhaps even himself, that she was the last of the line of the Peralta barons. He gave her an education, surrounded her with luxury, and then, to solidify his claim, he married her. Now he was not just a claimant, he was the husband of the Arizona Baroness. The plan worked brilliantly. The powerful railroad company Southern Pacific paid him $50,000 for the right to lay tracks on his land. Hundreds of mines and farms followed suit. For several years, Rivas became the uncrowned king of Arizona. He lived in a mansion, entertained senators, and dictated his will to an entire state. But the grander the lie, the more attention it attracts. We see that one single person takes up the case, Government Inspector Matthew Reynolds. Reynolds did not believe the tale. He initiated his own investigation that lasted for years. Like Rivas, he traveled to Spain. But he didn't just examine documents, he scrutinized the paper, the ink, the watermarks. And in the dusty church archive, he found a record of the baptism of one of the baron's ancestors. The record exists, yet Reynolds notices what Rivas overlooked. The handwriting in this one line differs from the handwriting on the rest of the page. This was the first crack in the monolith of lies. There was more to come. Reynolds proved that the paper on which the main grant was written was produced in a factory that opened 100 years after the date indicated on the document. He found traces of modern chemicals in the old ink. The House of Cards, built on a century of dust and audacity, collapsed. In 1996, James Rivas was tried. His baroness cried in court, still believing that she was the heir of a noble lineage. Rivas was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He stole not money, he stole history. He emerged from prison a broken man and died in poverty, trying to sell his story to journalists. His wife, Sophia, never recovered from the shock that her whole life had been a fabrication and spent her days in destitution. This story teaches us that the most ambitious lie can be shattered by the smallest detail. Rivas was a genius of forgery, but he forgot that the past leaves traces that cannot be completely erased. We leave behind dusty archives where truth and fiction intertwine into a single knot. Rivas created a false history to seize the earth, but our next story is of two women who crafted false lives to claim something far more elusive: freedom and love. We must depart from the Wild West and travel to the elegant yet equally dangerous salons of Wales to meet two ladies who were not what they seemed and whose secret shook all of Britain. The Deception number 16. The ladies who rewrote the rules of love. We set aside dusty archives and the greedy ambitions of Arizona's defense to enter a world where deception serves not for gain, but for survival. We find ourselves in the green, damp hills of Wales, in the valley of Llangan. It is the end of the 16th century. Here, away from the hustle and bustle of the capital, in a Gothic cottage drenched in ivy and roses, lived two women who became legends in their own lifetime. They are Lady Eleanor Butler and Miss Sarah Ponsonby. We see carriages approaching their house, named Place Nuit. Out of them step poets, dukes, generals, the entire aristocracy and intellectual elite of Britain. They have come to gaze upon the curiosity of the ladies from Llangollen. Guests see two elderly women dressed in austere, nearly masculine suits made of dark fabric, with powdered and closely cropped hair. They engage in scholarly discussion, recite poetry, and offer tea. They are the epitome of refined friendship, two souls who have fled the busy world to dedicate themselves to art and seclusion. And this is the greatest deception. Not because they lied about their names or origins, their deception was far subtler. They made the world believe in a story that masked a truth too scandalous for that era. They stole for themselves the right to live and love, hiding it in plain sight, under a veneer of respectable eccentricity. The anatomy of this lie began in Ireland in 1778. Eleanor Butler was a spinster from a noble but impoverished family. Her family planned to confine her to a convent. Sarah Ponsonby was a young orphan whom her guardian, the elderly Sir William, was trying to force into marriage. For both women, the future loomed as a prison, either behind convent walls or in the arms of an unloved husband. And they chose escape. Their first attempt failed. They were caught, returned home, and separated. But we see their unyielding will. They staged a hunger strike, threatened suicide, and ultimately, their desperate families relented, allowing them to leave with a small pension just to avoid disgrace. Upon arriving in Els, they realized that to survive together, they needed to create a legend. Simply living under the same roof would spark suspicion and gossip, so they executed a brilliant surgical intervention in public consciousness. They devised a role for themselves, that of romantic companions. This concept, lacking any sexual connotations in the 16th century, described an elevated platonic friendship. They created their own uniform, dark dresses and men's hats that rendered them genderless in society's eyes. They surrounded themselves with books and transformed their home into a Gothic paradise, which became a magnet for tourists. The psychology behind this deception was built on the notion that society only saw what was convenient for it to see. It was easier to admire eccentric intellectual women than to acknowledge that before them was likely the first openly living lesbian couple in British history. William Hartsworth wrote a sonnet about them. The Duke of Wellington, victor over Napoleon, was a frequent guest. They became not just accepted, they became fashionable. Their deception lasted 50 years. They slept in the same bed, kept joint diaries, exchanged rings, and bequeathed to be buried in the same grave. When Eleanor passed away, Sarah survived her by just 2 years. Their last wish was fulfilled. Their shared tombstone bears an epitaph celebrating their celestial friendship. This story is a unique example of how a lie can become armor protecting the truth. They did not deceive one another, they deceived the world to obtain what the world was unwilling to grant them, the freedom to be together. Their crime harmed no one, but gifted them a whole life. We leave these two ladies in their Gothic garden, where they created their own world through a carefully constructed illusion. Their lie was protective, almost innocent. But our next story will take us back to a world of male ambition, where deception becomes a tool not for gaining freedom, but for achieving glory. We are headed to a quiet English village in the early 20th century to witness the birth of a missing link in human evolution. A link that turned out to be a brazen forgery that fooled the world's greatest scientists for 40 years. Deception number 17. A skull born of pride and monkey jaw. We leave the ladies from Wales in their tranquil paradise, where lies served as a shield for love, and return to a world where it becomes a sword for conquering fame. We are in England, in the sleepy village of Piltdown, Sussex, in the year 1912. The air smells of wet grass and the smugness of the British Empire. But beneath this calm lies a deep scientific unease. The Germans have found their Neanderthal, the French their Cro-Magnon, and England, the ruler of the seas, cannot boast a single significant fossil discovery. We stand on the edge of a gravel pit and watch a man who is about to provide his nation with what it so desperately craves, the first Englishman. His name is Charles Dawson. He is a lawyer and an amateur archaeologist obsessed with the desire to enter the pantheon of great scientists. We see workers handing him fragments of bones found in the gravel. Dawson eagerly assembles them. And then, there it is, the miracle. A part of a skull, thick and massive, undoubtedly belonging to an ancient human. And next to it, a fragment of a jaw, astonishingly similar to that of a monkey, yet with teeth worn down in a human-like manner. It was the perfect finding. Too perfect. It was the precise answer to the great scientific question of the age. Which developed first, the brain or the body? The Piltdown Man, as he would be called, provided a clear answer. First, the large developed brain appeared, the human skull, and only afterwards did the other primitive traits follow, the monkey jaw. It flattered human vanity and, more importantly, British nationalism. The anatomy of this deception is not merely a jigsaw of bones, it is a sinister art. We peek inside the secret workshop of the fraudster. Here he takes the skull of a medieval man. Here is the jaw of a modern orangutan. He carefully breaks off the joint that would reveal its primate origin. Then, using a file, he shapes the teeth to mimic human wear, and for the final touch, He soaks the bones in a solution of potassium bichromate and iron salts to give them an ancient, noble hue. When the Eoanthropus dawsoni, a man behind Richard Dawson, was presented to the Geological Society of London, the scientific community erupted in applause. The finest minds, including Arthur Smith Woodward from the British Museum and even Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes who lived nearby, enthusiastically embraced the discovery. The psychology of this mass blindness was built on three pillars: desire, patriotism, and control. First, scientists wanted to believe it because it confirmed their theories. Second, it was their ancestor, an Englishman, not some crude German savage. Third, Dawson and his supporters zealously guarded the bones themselves, providing mainly plaster casts for study. Critics found it difficult to prove their case without access to the original. For 40 years, the Piltdown Man occupied an honored place in anthropology textbooks. For 40 years, scientists built their theories on this hoax, ignoring new finds from Africa and Asia that contradicted the Piltdown model. It was a scientific dead end created by a single forgery. But time is the enemy of any lie. By the 1950s, new dating methods emerged. We see how a team of scientists from Oxford applies secondary analyses to the famous bones. The result was like a thunderclap. The skull turned out to be no more than 600 years old, and the jaw no more than 100. This was the end. Further microscopic examination revealed file marks on the teeth. The deception was uncovered. Who did it? Charles Dawson died back in 1916, taking the mystery to his grave. He is the prime suspect, driven by a thirst for fame. But there were other theories, each more bizarre than the last. From a museum worker who decided to prank his superiors, to Conan Doyle himself, who was supposedly seeking revenge against the scientific community for mocking his belief in spiritualism, the mystery remained unsolved. This story is a bitter lesson that even in a world of strict facts and evidence, human emotions, pride, vanity, and nationalism can prove stronger than a microscope. Science was deceived because it desperately wanted to be deceived. We leave the Piltdown Man in the British Museum's Hall of Shame. His fraud was etched in bones and stones. It smoldered for decades before being exposed, but our next story is about a lie that was woven from thin air, which spread like wildfire and caused panic in a single evening. We must travel to America in the 30s to tune our radios and hear how one young genius made the nation believe in a Martian invasion. Deception number 18. The War of the Worlds announced on the radio. We leave a quiet English village where the deception has been maturing for decades and plunge into the electric crackle of the radio waves of pre-war America. It is the 30th of October, 1938, the canon of Halloween. In living rooms across the country, families gather around piles of wooden radios. The air is thick with fear. Across the Atlantic, Hitler is already marching through Europe, and the word war hangs on the tip of everyone's tongue. That evening, we tune into CBS. A regular music program begins from the Park Plaza Hotel. But suddenly, the music is interrupted. We hear the excited voice of the announcer. "Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program to bring you a special report." Professor Farrell from the Mount Jennings Observatory reports several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. This is the beginning of a performance that will enter history as the greatest radio hoax. Behind the studio console sits 23-year-old Denny with a velvet voice and a devilish imagination. His name is Orson Welles. He and his Mercury Theater on the Air troupe are staging a radio adaptation of Herbert Wells's novel War of the Worlds. But they are not doing it like a regular play. They are simulating a news report. The anatomy of this lie was built on realism. We hear reporter Carl Phillips describing the fall of a meteor on a farm in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, live on air. His voice quivers with excitement, then a pause, a crackle of interference. And then he is screaming, gasping in terror, describing how monstrous creatures with 3 legs emerge from a metallic cylinder and burn everything around them with heat rays. We hear the screams of the crowd, the sounds of sirens, explosions. The psychology of panic worked perfectly. First, most listeners tuned in late and missed the announcement that this was a play. They only heard fragments of news. Second, the format was all too familiar to them. In that era, radio was the primary source of information, and people were used to trusting the voice from the receiver. Alarming reports from Europe had accustomed them to emergency broadcasts. Third, Wells used authority. He included commentary from Princeton professors and addresses from the Secretary of the Interior. And America believed. We see panic erupting across the country. People are running out of their homes with wet towels on their heads to protect themselves from poisonous gas. The telephone lines of police stations and newspaper offices are burning up with calls. In New Jersey, volunteer squads with shotguns set out to hunt Martians. In one town, residents mistook a water tower for an alien battle machine and opened fire on it. The next morning, newspapers came out with headlines, "Radio play causes terror nationwide." Estimates suggest around 1 million people believed in the reality of the invasion. When, at the end of the hour, Orson Welles went on air and innocently reminded everyone that it was just a Halloween prank, it was already too late. A storm of criticism descended upon him. He was accused of irresponsibility and nearly faced legal action. But this story is not just about a hoax. It was the first encounter in history of humanity with the power of new media. Wells, perhaps unknowingly, conducted a massive social experiment that demonstrated how vulnerable society is to information presented in a plausible form. This was a precursor to all modern fears of deepfakes. This story teaches us that reality is not what we see, but what we are told. And if the storyteller is convincing enough, we are ready to believe even in Martians walking across the fields of New Jersey. We turn off the radio. The screams and sirens still ring in our ears. Orson Welles' lie was brief, but its echo can still be heard today. If he deceived millions for a single night, our next hero deceived one single person for 28 years, making him fight a war that had long since ended. We are about to journey into the jungles of the Philippines to find the last soldier of World War II who did not know that the world had moved on. The Deception, number 19. A soldier who fought a war alone. We turn off the crackling radio receiver and leave America gripped by panic over a fictitious war. Now, we must head to a real war, or rather, its ghostly echo that resonated in the jungles for almost 30 years. We are on the Philippine island of Lubang in the year 1974. The world has already witnessed the Vietnam War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and man has walked on the moon. But here, in the dense, humid thickets, time stands still, and more often than not, a gaunt figure emerges, a soldier from the Imperial Army of Japan in tattered form. His Arisaka rifle is in perfect condition, and in his eyes, there is a fanatical devotion to duty. This is Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda. He is the last soldier of World War II, and he is a victim of the longest and most tragic self-deception in military history, bolstered by a single order. In 1945, when the Americans landed on Lubang, Major Taniguchi ordered Onoda and his small unit to retreat into the mountains and conduct guerrilla warfare. "You are forbidden to commit suicide. Fight until I return for you. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we will come back for you." We watch as this order, like a virus, penetrates Onoda's consciousness and becomes his only reality. The war ended a few months later. Japan capitulated, but Onoda did not believe it. When leaflets announcing the end of the war began to be dropped from airplanes, he decided they were enemy propaganda. When he found newspapers left by locals with news about post-war Japan, he considered them expertly forged. The psychology of this deception is unique. Onoda was not deceived by the enemy, he deceived himself, for the alternative of admitting that his mission was pointless and the sacrifice of his comrades was in vain was unbearable. He built a fortress around himself, made of faith in the order. Any fact contradicting that faith was dismissed as a lie. We follow him through the decades. He and his few remaining comrades, who eventually died in skirmishes or surrendered, continued their war. They attacked local farmers, believing them to be guerrillas. They burned the rice crops and stole livestock. Over nearly 30 years, they killed about 30 Filipinos. To the world, he was a ghost, To the locals, a curse. The Japanese government sent search expeditions. His relatives came to the island and pleaded through a loudspeaker for him to come out. But he saw only clever traps set by the enemy, using the voices of his loved ones to lure him out. The anatomy of this deception collapsed only when the key to his consciousness was found, the very man who had programmed him. In 1974, a young Japanese traveler named Norio Suzuki went to Lubang on a quirky mission to find Lieutenant Onoda, Panda, and the Yeti, in that exact order. And he found him. But even Suzuki could not convince Onoda to surrender. The soldier insisted, "I will not surrender until I receive orders from my commander." They had to track down the aging Major Taniguchi in Japan, who had become a humble bookseller after the war. We witnessed this realistic scene. A gray-haired old man in civilian clothes arrives in Lubang, goes to the agreed place in the jungle, and, standing before his subordinate who still looks like a soldier from 45, he officially reads the orders to cease hostilities in a trembling voice. Only then did Onoda cry. His world, built on a single order, collapsed. He surrendered his rifle to the president of the Philippines and returned to Japan, where he was welcomed as a hero. But he could never adapt to the new country that seemed so foreign to him. He moved to Brazil, became a farmer, and until the end of his days believed that the years spent in the jungle were not a mistake, but a fulfillment of duty. This story serves as a tragic monument to the power of orders and the human capacity for self-deception. It shows us that the strongest prison is the one we build in our own minds. We leave Onoda in his Brazilian solitude. His lie was passive. He was its victim, not its creator. But our next story is about active, cheerful, and utterly cynical deception. We will move to America in the 70s, to a world of emerging marketing and pop culture, to meet a man who made millions selling rocks. Ordinary rocks. As pets. Deception number 20. The perfect pet, born from a joke in a bar. We leave Lieutenant Onoda in his jungle of self-deception, where the lie was a tragedy and duty was a curse. Now we shift to a world where lying is a comedy, and duty costs just $4 for the right to laugh at the whole world. It is California in April 1975. America is tired. Tired of Vietnam, of Watergate, of inflation. A thick fog of cynicism hangs in the air, and people desperately seek a reason to smile. We sit in a dimly lit bar, listening to a man named Goradal complain to his friends. They lament about their pets. The dog needs walking. The cat is scratching the furniture. The fish are dying, and the hamster smells. Then, a sharp-tongued advertising copywriter takes a sip of beer and, with a completely serious face, declares, "I have the perfect pet. He does not eat, does not drink, does not get sick, does not die, and never disobeys. I have a rock." Laughter erupts in the bar. But for Dal, this is no joke. This is an epiphany. In this moment, within a cloud of cynicism, an idea is born, so absurd that it can only be genius. The anatomy of this pet rock is a triumph of marketing over common sense. Dal did not sell a rock. The rock was merely a prop. He sold an idea, packaged in cardboard and wit. We see him driving to a supply warehouse, purchasing smooth gray rocks brought from a Mexican beach for 1 cent each. Then, he invests all his money and talent into packaging. The product, named Pet Rock, was sold in a small cardboard box resembling a pet carrier. It had air holes punched in it. Inside, on a soft bed of straw, lay your new best friend. But the real treasure was the pebbles. The highlight was a 32-page care and training manual. We flipped through this booklet, and it's a masterpiece of satire. Dal, as a professional word manipulator, took absurdity to perfection. The manual detailed how to teach your rock commands like sit and lie down. It noted that the rock excels at these commands right from the start. The command roll over required a little help from the owner. The stay command was also accomplished with the owner's hand. The instructions cautioned against bathing the rock in water that is too hot and offered tips on how to introduce it to other rocks in the park. The psychology behind this deception was that the buyer was a co-conspirator. No one believed the rock was alive. People were not buying a pet. They were buying a joke. It was the perfect gift in the postmodern age, a symbol of meaninglessness, a thing that was famous simply for being famous. Owning a pet rock spoke to your sense of humor and your ironic detachment from consumer society, even as you participated in it. The success was explosive. By Christmas 1975, America had gone crazy. In 6 months, Dal sold over 1.5 million rocks at $4 each. He became a millionaire overnight. We see serious news channels interviewing him while he calmly discusses the benefits of stone pets. But like any bright flash, this trend burned out almost instantly. By the beginning of 1976, the hype had faded. Pet rocks were relegated to the back drawers of desks, becoming a symbol of a fleeting fad. Dal attempted to launch other projects, but was never able to replicate his success. He forever remained the guy who sold rocks. This story is a fun yet instructive example of how the right packaging can sell anything, even emptiness. The pet rock was the great-grandfather of all meaningless viral trends, from Tamagotchis to NFTs featuring images of monkeys. It proved that sometimes the most honest lie is one that acknowledges itself as absurd from the very beginning. Gary Dal sold a harmless illusion in a box, and everyone laughed. But what if the illusion is not harmless? What if it smells of illness and death, and it is not an advertiser selling it, but the government itself? Our next story will not be one of fun. We are heading into the heart of America to witness one of the most inhumane medical experiments in history, disguised as an act of compassion.